Yeah, I learned my right from wrong on a song. I let my heart bleed on my sleeve through microphones. I'm trying to right my wrongs. Promise I do. I ain't trying to stay up on that wide road, cause I can't let them take my soul. Nah, 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 no. Oh, I can't let them take my soul. Nah, 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 no.
Welcome back to the Urban Perspectives, where we bring you the stories that matter from the voices who live them. Today, we were sitting down with someone who's not just talking about change, she's making it happen. Right here in Newark and beyond. Lakeesha Eure is the Deputy Mayor and former Director of the Office of Violence Prevention and Trauma Recovery, a groundbreaking initiative that's changing the way cities approach public safety. Lakeesha has been on the front lines, building programs that tackle violence at its roots while helping people and communities heal. Under her leadership, Newark has become a national model for how to rethink public safety, and her work is paving the way for cities across the country to follow. Lakeesha, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Mr. Prey, for having me today.
Lakeesha, you've got a powerful story coming from grassroots activism, working your way up to leading the community-based public safety in the city of Newark. Talk to us about your journey. What was it like in your life that made you step into this work?
So it's certainly been a journey to get here. I am born and raised in the city of Newark in the West Ward on 11th Street and Central Avenue. And so being born and raised in the city, I come from community. Okay. And community is who raised me. Community is who gave me my values. Community is who ultimately shaped me. And so growing up in the city of Newark, we know that it has probably always been written with crime and violence. But depending on where you're from, you didn't experience it the way that other people experienced it. So I didn't necessarily experience it. But as I grew up, going through the city, I have a brother that is, in the streets. My brother has been in and out of jail since he's been about 12 years old.
Okay.
And with him being in and out, I've been exposed to a bunch of things. And as I continue to grow, I go to high school, I go to college. And so my first year of college, my father passed away. And then my second year of college, my mother passed away. And so I had two parents that passed away 8 months apart. And so life became very different. And when I went to college, I wanted to be a mortician because I always wanted to have a job. I always wanted to have some stability and security, but I wanted to be able to pass a business down to my family.
Well, based on how Newark was at that time, you had a study line of clients.
Oh, I certainly would have. Yeah. But then, as life is happening, my personality has always been probably sociology, social work. Mm-hmm. And so when I ultimately had my tragedies, I dropped out of school, came home and I worked. And then I went back to school later. And so there was a day that I was home from college for the weekend and somebody came and knocked on my door looking for my brother. And that person ultimately had a conversation with me and said that he'll just see my brother the next day. Mm-hmm. And my brother was asleep. I didn't get an opportunity to tell him that the person came. And when he left out the next morning, he had gotten shot down the street.
Down the street from the house you and he was staying at?
Down the street from the house he and I lived our entire life that my mother and father raised us in. Now they're gone. It's just me and my brother. And so he's still in the streets. I'm in college. I'm in school. But he got shot. And so my life began to be different because if the person came to my house that time, they surely was going to come back again because my brother didn't die. Okay. And so the house and the place that I lived my entire life, I had to move overnight and leave.
How old were you?
I was 19.
19 years old.
Probably 20, but okay. Very young.
Okay.
Trying to navigate life and figure it out. And so I went back to college after that. After I moved, I went back to college. I finished. I actually graduated with honors. Mm. And so my brother had gotten shot this time, but he had gotten shot another time. He had gotten shot 6 times. This second time he got shot.
And he got shot on 6 separate occasions?
One occasion, and 6 times.
One occasion got shot 6 times.
Correct.
On one occasion?
On one occasion.
Okay.
And so, again, violence,
okay.
Gun violence.
Where were you living when this happened?
I was living in the city of Orange.
Oh, and your brother was still staying in Newark?
Yes, he was still in Newark, back and forth.
Okay.
And then my brother was also shot by the police. And so gun violence, ultimately I was exposed to with him, but I had 2 guys that I dealt with that were shot and killed in the streets as well. Okay. And so I ultimately said that I need to do something about it because the grief and the impact that it had made me want to do something about it.
In some regards, a sad story, but I get a testament to the need to have violence prevention in our cities. Because you were a young girl, you were 19 years old, and you witnessed the death of 2 of your parents, albeit not to violence.
Right.
But then the shooting of your brother and the death of 2 boyfriends before you were 21 years old.
Correct.
Yeah, that was a great deal. So that is sort of what inspired you to go into social work.
It inspired me. Social work has been what I always want to do because my energy and my personality has always been helping people, figuring it out, problem solving.
Okay.
But my personality was also in activism. And so my first job out of college, I worked at a school for kids that had alternative education that was in the DIFUS system, that was kids that had been incarcerated and they were behind educationally. Okay. So that was my first job out of college. And so when I was there, I was running a life skills program, teaching them life skills. Okay. And one day I was there, I saw the Black Panther Party came and was running sessions with them. And so, I probably already had a spirit of activism, but that kind of piqued some activism for me, which made me say, again, advocacy, getting involved, helping people was always my personality. I just didn't know how to channel it. And so having opportunities to now channel it for a cause is what put me on this journey.
Back then, did you ever envision that the journey you was on would bring you to the position that you are today as the deputy mayor?
Absolutely not.
Of New Jersey's largest city?
Absolutely not. I didn't have a desire to be in politics. I wanted to get a private practice. I wanted to do therapy. I wanted to ultimately have a place where people can go to get help.
Let me ask you a question sort of independent of our subject matter. Do you consider what you're doing to actually be in politics, or is it just really community activism and you have a political position? You don't consider yourself a politician?
Absolutely not. I think that it's everything, right? I think that it's certainly community-based because I've always been community-based, always knew the community is the center of everything that I do. Okay. So community-based, but I am in a political setting.
The Office of Violence Prevention and Trauma Recovery is one of the first of its kind. You've been at the center of this. What was the vision behind creating this office, and what role did you see for yourself in helping to bring this vision to fruition?
So the Office of Violence Prevention and Trauma Recovery was ultimately started in 2020 in the wake of George Floyd, when there was national cries around defunding of the police. Okay. But before there was an Office of Violence Prevention, there was a Newark Anti-Violence Coalition, there was a Street Warriors, there was a Stop Shooting, there was other organizations, SOS, that had been ultimately creating violence prevention in the city. We just didn't have a formal name for it. We didn't have a strategy. It wasn't as formalized. And so we go back as far as 2008, 2009, 15 years ago, where we had over 100 homicides happening in the city of Newark. And so we began to take my activism approach was getting in the streets, talking to the people, creating awareness around what was taking place, because during those times when there was 100 homicides, it was business as usual.
Now, what year was this, you said?
2008, 2009, and probably even before that, I became involved during those years.
Just for a context, what's the homicide rate in the city of Newark now?
We just finished 2024 at 37.
So like a 70% reduction?
Over that time period, yes.
What do you consider the cause for such a drastic drop in the homicides over that time period?
So we ultimately began to strategize and organize around what violence prevention needs to look like. It's the community-based approach. Okay. We've always had law enforcement. We've always had police officers, but police come after things happen. We needed a prevention approach. We needed an intervention approach, and we needed a treatment approach. Okay. And so that's what we implemented in the city when the mayor became the mayor. 2014, Mayor Baraka became the mayor. And while we were out doing the activism, we had demands. And one of our first demands was having an active voice in public safety. We wanted to be able to tell people what we wanted and not city government or anybody else tell community what public safety should look like. We wanted employment because we understood that violence was about poverty. that people were being robbed and things were happening because of poverty. We wanted the homicide taught in the schools. We wanted Black and brown history taught in the schools because we understood that if people knew who they were less likely to commit violence against people who look like them. We wanted the Bloods and the Crips to put their guns down because back then they was blaming all the violence on gang violence. And we knew that it wasn't all gang violence. But then we needed to talk to the Bloods, the Crips, and the gang culture. And finally, we wanted violence declared a public health issue. I'm
just getting a little ahead of myself. Now, as part of the your office and as part of your duties, you have created a coalition of sorts where you bring the gangs together to make sure they are tamping down the violence in the cities. You want to speak a little bit to that?
Certainly.
And how it was started.
So we ultimately understood that while we wanted violence declared a public health issue, that meant we needed to bring all the resources to the table. We needed to bring the hospitals, board of education, police department, all the institutions and community together to coordinate an approach. And what we found is that while we ultimately created the Brick City Peace Collective, which was coordinating all the organizations, community institutions, we left out a certain population, which was the people who was closest to the problem.
Okay.
Right? The people who was committing some of these, acts. And so that's our gang culture. We didn't have a place for them at the table.
Okay.
And so we now brought them to the table. And so one year we had 12 homicides in 1 month. In May 2023, we had 12 homicides in 1 month.
Okay.
And we were outraged by that. And we said, we need to do a different approach. We need, something to happen. But one of the people that got killed that month was a person that was high-ranking gang member.
Okay.
And the community was on go. And so we needed to figure out what to do. So we brought some of them together to ultimately understand what is it that y'all need to help us help us? How do we bring them to be a part of public safety? In which case, we've never done that before. So in order to get something different, you got to do something different. And so we began to talk to them and they said they needed therapy.
Really?
Therapy.
Did you find that unusual or did you always see that as a possible undergirding of what was happening in the city?
So because I come from that background, I think everybody need therapy.
Okay.
But I didn't expect to hear it from them and not have to coach it, right?
Yeah.
I didn't have to coach that out of them. And so they said that that's what they need because all of the little guys that's under them was experiencing depression and stress and anxiety, and they were angry and all of those things, and they didn't know what to do. And so at that time, I didn't have enough social workers or therapists that was willing to go to the neighborhoods and to the backyards where they needed to get the help. And I didn't have the know-how. But I said, I know I'm not afraid. Okay. And so I began to bring them together and I began to do brunch with them every Sunday to be able to talk about what's happening in the neighborhoods and how do we, address it and how are you feeling? We did wellness checks with them.
What was their reception to you as a woman in what is ordinarily sort of macho environment that myself as a Black man and, how you're viewed? Did they think that you were out of your place or in over your head?
No, not
What was their reaction?
So the reaction was bringing the folks together, that the people who were at the head, we had, our new direction folks, and we had other people who were in neighborhoods that had leadership, that had respect, that had to vouch for me, right? That had to vouch for she's okay, she's respected, because I wasn't a threat.
Okay.
Right. And so me not posing a threat was the ultimate thing that helped to create some trust. We had to do a lot of trust building. We had to do a lot of vouching. We had to do a lot of, conversations to keep it safe and have folks understand that this was a safe space for them. Okay. So it took a lot of trust building in order to be able to build what we have now.
That's interesting. And it's informative. I hope it's informative to our audience to understand not just the culture, the inner city culture as it regards gangs, but a model, a proof of concept model that the what's being done in Newark actually does work and could probably work on a national scale. Let me just ask you another question. Now let's get real for a second. This office wouldn't exist without the city of Newark shifting funds from law enforcement to community-based initiatives. That's part of what people mean when they, and I'll ask this differently, is that part of what people mean when they say defund the police?
Well, what we understood, because we had been out there for 5, 10, 15 years with no funding and no resources, we understood that there needed to be a shift in terms of how we allocate funds to community. And so if law enforcement has all of the funding, all of the resources, then during that time, again, this was the rallying cry nationally after George Floyd for defunding the police. And so we reallocated 5% of the police department's budget to create the Office of Violence Prevention.
Which is, what's their budget, the police department?
During that time, it was probably $230 million.
$230 million.
And so that meant about $11.5 million for the Office of Violence Prevention.
Okay.
Which is a drop in the bucket.
Absolutely.
Right. And so we understood that in utilizing...
Like 5% or something, right?
5%.
Yeah, okay.
And so we wanted that 5% in perpetuity. So anytime their budget increases, our budget increases as well.
All right.
And so we ultimately said, we're not going to defund the police, but we're going to refund the people. Right. And so that means refunding all of the people that's been incarcerated, all of the people that have, been under public safety in a way that there's no resources for them to get programming, for them to be able to go to college, for them to be able to get food, clothing, shelter, transportation, basic needs, really around us making it a real public health model just under public safety.
What would you say to folks who hear the words defund the police and immediately think that it's about taking away public safety?
It's not about taking anything from law enforcement and from the police. We understood that law enforcement everywhere in the United States, law enforcement budget is the biggest budget, which means that's the biggest priority.
Okay.
And so in the city of Newark, we transformed one of the police stations, one of the precincts, into a place where people can get help. People who've been victimized don't have anywhere to go. People who've been victimized don't have a place to be able to get resources. So we shifted the culture. We're ultimately shifting the culture from trauma to trust. That's what we say is one of our things. Because law enforcement hasn't been a trusted entity in a lot of neighborhoods. Okay. So now we're changing the narrative. We're shifting how we do things. We're transforming how the culture. So we took a police precinct and we made it into an Office of Violence Prevention where we hired social workers and outreach workers and victim advocates. So if a person gets robbed, stabbed, shot, anything happens to them, now they have a place that somebody's going to help them versus coming to the police department being afraid that they're not going to get the help that they need.
So is it a community center of sorts too?
It is. It's a community center of sorts because we run programming out of there. We run meetings. We have a computer room. We have a library. We have a conference room. We have a place for de-escalation that can take place. And so making sure that there's a safe haven and a place where people can get help when this place was once a place of harm.
Okay. Yeah, that's interesting. So it went from being like a hostile fort in the city to a place of refuge in the city, and both of it out of a precinct.
Absolutely. But this was also the place where our 67 rebellion sparked out of.
I remember that. I remember it well.
And so when we had a rebellion with the police and community, and during this time, cities went up in smoke. And so I think that it was only right for us to transform this space into a different kind of space, to say we changing the culture and the way we do things.
How much attention has been brought to that transformation that you're speaking to? So, I mean, on a national level, even statewide.
I think every time I speak about it, I talk about it. And when the mayor did the executive order to create the Office of Violence Prevention, there was a press conference right in front of the building space. Okay. And so law enforcement ultimately has a respect for the space and us being in there. Okay. And in us refunding the people, we ultimately change policy. So for every 10 police officers that go into the police academy, I get to hire one social worker. Okay. And so we're creating equity. So the first year that the Office of Violence Prevention started, we had 100 officers that went into the police department. And so I hired 10 social workers. Okay. So I get a 10-to-1. But beyond them going into the academy, we do trainings together. We do some of the 2C law together. And so when law enforcement is graduating on one side, you have social workers graduating on the other side. Beautiful. And so having graduating classes, going together, working together, because ultimately we are first responders too. So when they're at the scenes, we're at the scenes. When they're at the hospital, we're at the hospital. So now we get notifications. We're working in collaboration because it's now being seen that the Office of Violence Prevention is an asset to law enforcement so that they don't have to be the social worker. They don't have to be the DIFUS worker. They don't have to be everything. They can just do their job and then allow the community-based side to do its work as well. So it's not an either or, it's an and.
You know, I've followed police and inner city communities' reaction or interaction with the police. And I've also followed some instances where organizations similar but not the same as the one that you operate have had to interact with the police. And in some instances, there's been some tension. What do you do to keep down the probability of that kind of tension between the community activists and the police that are policing these communities?
So we've had to have a lot of groundwork done. That's a lot of communication, that's meetings, that's talking to the heads. So we ultimately, the mayor has been the person in leadership to say that this is valuable. This is what I value. This is what everybody has to value. This is where the priority is going to be. And if this doesn't succeed, then nobody succeeds.
Okay.
And so it has to be that level of aggression in terms of why this work is important, because so many people put in so many sacrifices. When we were out doing our activism work, we were out rain, sleet, snow, no matter the weather condition, shutting down traffic, making community aware that violence is taking place in our community, and it's our responsibility to be responsible for it. Okay. So we know what's happening. We know who did it. We know why it happened and all of those things. But when it's time to have accountability, then we want the law enforcement to step in. And that's not how this goes. So we ultimately understood there's a community-based space here. And because Mayor Baraka was out there in the streets, he understood as well. So when you have leadership that understands, then they're able to make the approach and say, this is the priority. This is where the resources are going. This has to be respected. And it's ultimately my way or no way around this.
Okay. You know, I follow some statistics in that regard, and I see that homicides are down appreciably in Newark. You feel that this is a direct result of the interaction between the police department and the community-based organizations?
It's community-based organizations, law enforcement, and city government.
Okay.
Right? And so it's a top-down and a bottom-up approach.
Okay.
In which case we are able to get the impact that we need when we understand that if we have shared values, shared data, shared information, shared leadership, shared all of those things that law enforcement and city government, y'all can't be at the helm of everything.
Okay.
Right? So community has to have some space.
Okay.
And when you allow community in, you get to see the impact that they get to have, because ultimately it's the impact of the community plus data, right? Mm-hmm. Understanding where to put resources is what has made this tremendous impact in our community to get homicides down. But the homicides are down because the police have given the Office of Violence Prevention over 2,700 referrals. Okay. Right. And before, police wasn't referring anybody to anything. Right. Mm-hmm. So having more referrals, having more programming, having more resources, having more people involved, ultimately is where we've been able to get this drive down in homicides. But ultimately having better information around public safety. Only 1% of the population experience 80% of crime and violence.
Okay.
And so, you know, really getting people to understand that everybody don't experience crime and violence at the same rate.
I've read similar statistics, not just in Newark, but in cities across the country, that it's a very small proportion of people that's actually committing the crime.
Correct.
And most of them are generally repeat offenders in that regard.
Correct. And so we have to not be afraid to go talk to the repeat offenders.
Okay.
We have to not be afraid to go knock on the doors and say, hey, we understand that you've been involved in some activities over and over and over again, but we coming to you with some resources. What is it that you need in order not to rob people, in order for you not to steal cars? What is it that you need in order to, you know, not be a part of this crime? Very direct, right? Versus having all of the academics in the room trying to figure it out. You go directly to the source and you ask them the question and you bring them to the table and you let them come up with the solutions. And so that's really what we've been able to do. We've taken a focused deterrent strategy. That's what we call it. But ultimately, we're looking at who's committing the most crime and violence and being able to work with them very directly. That's our youth, because there was an increase in youth violence maybe about a year ago, and most of our young people being in the youth house. And so we began to employ them and give them jobs and get them training and get them education and get them resources, because we're going to the root cause. What is the root cause of crime and violence? Mental health issues, financial issues, whatever those things are. And you have to be able to provide the need in order for those things to be resolved.
Lakeesha, this isn't just about government offices and big programs. It's about people, about communities. What can members of the community do to support the work you're leading? And how can everyday folks get involved in violence prevention and trauma recovery in their own neighborhoods?
So like you said, this isn't just about city government. This is about community. And so community knows its needs. And community ultimately always create things that they need themselves. But government is responsible for helping them to fund those things, responsible for helping them coordinate those things. So it's a coordinated effort. So the Office of Violence Prevention has funded over 50 organizations to be able to do work in the city. There was a $20 million investment, and we took about 16 million of those ARPA dollars, and we invested them in community. And so if community want to get involved, they no longer have to go to City Hall to get those answers. Those people are right in your neighborhoods. And so on our city's website, you can find information about all of the organizations. The Brick City Peace Collective, they meet every second Wednesday of the month. And people are invited to attend at 6 o'clock at 311 Washington Street.
And what's that, the Brick City Peace Collective? The
Brick City Peace Collective is the entity that we created for coordination. Many cities are doing this work, and it's in silos, and folks are ultimately in competition about funding and who does this and who does that. But we ultimately said we needed something for collaboration and partnership. And so it ultimately coordinates our ecosystem. And so we have all 50 of those organizations at the table once a month, meeting, talking about what they're doing, supporting each other, and having a real collaborative and collective effort. And so if people want to get involved, then we can give you those organizations that you can get involved with, or create your own. Folks can create their own thing, and then they can ultimately become a part of the work that's happening. Everything is in violence prevention, because we're talking about gun violence, domestic violence, sexual violence, right? All sorts of violence. And so people, I would say, have to get in where they fit in, figure out their lanes. So we funded 7 different areas: trauma recovery, domestic violence, high-risk intervention, safe passage, youth mentoring, therapeutic and clinical services, and victim services. And so if we have 7 lanes, surely you can fit into one of those lanes. And if you know your lane, you don't have to crisscross into anybody else's space. And we all go in the same place. We just get in there differently, doing it together.
That's interesting. Let me ask you one last question. About 3 or 4 weeks ago, I was at King College, and there was a lot of community-based organizations there. But I noticed that one organization came from out of state. I think it was from Michigan, Detroit. And they came to get, I guess, some leadership points or some organizational points on what was being done here in Newark. Is Newark rapidly becoming a role model? I noticed you did something similar in another state. I think some people came up from D.C. Is the model that you're using in Newark being adopted or beginning to be adopted in other cities across the country?
Absolutely. Newark is being looked at as a national model, because we've been able to bring our numbers down tremendously. From last year to this year, we have a 23% reduction. And so year over year, we've had reductions, but they're looking at the way that city government supports the community. They're looking at the way law enforcement is having an active role. And so having city government, community, law enforcement all working together collaboratively is almost, unheard of in other cities. So they come here to see it in real life. They come here to see the ecosystem. They come here to see all the organizations working together. They come here to feel the spirit of Newark. Newark has always had an activism, go get it spirit, right? It's always been Newark forward, right? And they always say that, anywhere or anything that has to happen, Newark is going to get there first. And so we've had Detroit come here. We had Philly. We had about 32 mayors come and convene with our mayor about 2 years ago. We had a convening about 30 cities with 30 mayors to talk about public safety, community-based public safety, and not allowing law enforcement to be at the helm of everything, because people think that more police equals more safety, and that's just not true. And so we do have cities that come here to do site visits, and so we allow them to go to some of our organizations that's doing all the areas of the work. They get to see it in real life. They get to see the intervention. They get to see our gang culture, our hospital culture, all of the people truly working together. And so Newark is becoming a model, and Newark has been one of the models that other people are coming to look at, and we're writing and putting data out to show that we are going to get there, and we are there, but we still have some ways to go.
Well, in many regards, you sit at the helm of this movement. I guess this is Black girl magic in real time.
I don't know if it's Black girl magic, but it's certainly Black girl sacrifice. It's certainly Black girl has been at the forefront, on the front line, on the sideline, behind the line.
Okay.
I have certainly been there.
Okay.
I certainly have helped to create most of this work.
Okay.
And so the mayor had the vision, but somebody has to execute it.
Okay.
Right. And so being able to have vision, tenacity, the know-how to be able to have the proper handling of people, really is, a skill. And so my skills, my ability, and my passion, I believe, is what has been the success for this work.
A big thanks to you, Lakeesha Eure, for joining us today and sharing your story, your vision, and your dedication to transforming our communities. Lakeesha's work with the Office of Violence Prevention and Trauma is proof that real change starts at the grassroots level and grows when we all come together. My view is that change doesn't start from the top down, it starts from the bottom up. If today's conversation inspired you, don't let it stop here. Find ways to support the initiative like Lakeesha's. Get involved in our community. And remember, change isn't just possible, it's our responsibility. Don't forget, you can catch this in every episode of The Urban Perspectives, wherever you listen to podcasts. Subscribe, share it with someone who needs to hear these stories, and let's keep these conversations going. Remember, change starts with us. One voice, one action, one step at a time. Lakeesha, thank you very much for sharing, and hopefully to have you back here soon.
Thank you for having me.
'Cause I can't let them take my soul. Nah, 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 no. Oh, I can't let